What if I told you that Ferrari has built a car that sabotages one of his own pilots? What if Frédéric Vasseur himself was so surprised after reviewing Hamilton's car in Hungary that the entire SF25 technical design was questioned? Hamilton finished 12th, not only in the race, also in classification. Exactly in the same position in 2 different sessions under stable climatic conditions, with a car theoretically capable of fighting for the top 5 positions. A pilot who has won 7 world championships, which has been a symbol of technical domain and precision, was out of the points zone with a stupid ease. There was no fight. There was no reaction. Only frustration. And then the media outbreak came. In statements that expanded throughout the paddock as a fire in dry grass, Hamilton threw demolishing words. He said feeling absolutely useless. But the phrase that paralyzed all Maranello was not that. It was when he hinted bluntly that Ferrari probably needs to change pilot. That statement was not a complaint. It was a message, a warning, a break line. Frédéric Vasseur, director of the Ferrari team, did not ignore it, nor did he interpret it as an emotional tantrum. He understood it as what it was, a symptom of something much deeper. It was then that he decided to intervene directly. He ordered, together with Loic Serra, technical director, an exhaustive review of the Hamilton car. An inspection that will not only analyze superficial data, but will enter the most intimate of the machine. Sensors, telemetry, dynamic behavior, structural geometry. The goal was not to calm the pilot. It was discovering if, indeed, something was wrong, or if they were facing an uncomfortable truth they didn't want to accept. What they found was alarming. Hamilton's car not only worked badly, it was technically incompatible with his driving style. The report that arose from that review was described as a technical autopsy. The engineers found irregularities that had been crawling since the beginning of the season and that had not been clearly detected because Charles Leclerc's car, his teammate, did not present the same symptoms. In identical conditions, the SF25 delivered radically different behaviors between one car and another. Not because of the pilots, not due to driving errors, but for deeply rooted structural divergences in the design of the chassis. The phrase that best summarizes the technical report was brutal: 2 halves fighting each other. Thus described the engineers to Hamilton SF25, a car that seemed divided, as if he resisted internally to cooperate with himself. That description is not rhetorical. It is a literal representation of the conflict that the car lived in its dynamic behavior. Hamilton was not competing only against his rivals. He was competing against his own car. This discovery changed the narrative completely. He was no longer just a pilot adapting to a new team. It was a world star trapped in a structure that had not been thought for him. And, perhaps the most worrying of everything, it was a team that had been ignoring the signals for months to prioritize false technical stability. This was the exact moment where Ferrari, forced, had to look in and face an uncomfortable reality. They had built a car that, in their search to evolve the legacy of the SF24, had diverted towards a design that sacrificed compatibility with one of its main pilots. The Hungary GP ceased to be a simple career in the calendar. It became a real-time autopsy of what can happen when technical decisions, egos in the factory, and performance emergencies are combined without a coherent vision. And what was at stake was not just the result of Sunday. It was the future of the Hamilton-Ferrari project. A project that, instead of consolidating, began to be agreed publicly to millions of spectators. Let's start with the brakes. The SF25 braking unit showed thermal imbalances between the front and rear discs. What does this mean in real terms? That while Hamilton entered a curve waiting for a car response, the irregular temperature in the brakes generated an inconstant pedal pressure. In other words, sometimes the car stopped more than expected, sometimes not enough. The feeling was randomly, as if the car was playing with him. This erratic braking pattern was not theoretical. He had manifested in Spa-Francorchamps, where Hamilton starred in a high-speed spin. At that time he blamed a human error. After Hungary, it was confirmed that it was a symptom of an unresolved mechanical problem. Then there is the address. And here a detail that seems less but is devastating. The SF25 assisted management system was originally configured based on Carlos Sainz's requirements. A pilot who prefers progressive, less aggressive feedback. Hamilton, on the other hand, needs something completely different. An immediate response without dead areas, without interpretations. A hypersensitive direction that allows you to anticipate the movements of the car almost by instinct. The incompatibility was such that Ferrari was forced to develop 2 different versions of the management system. One for Leclerc, another for Hamilton. This decision, which may seem pragmatic, completely breaks with Maranello's traditional philosophy: build a unified car that works for both pilots. The creation of two parallel specifications is not just an anomaly. It is a tacit recognition of failure. The third point, and perhaps the most technical, has to do with the new frontal suspension geometry. Ferrari implemented a pull rod suspension by 2025. This design offers advantages in terms of aerodynamics, because it reduces progress resistance and allows greater freedom in airflow management. But what earns in theory, loses it in dynamic control if it is not perfectly calibrated. In the SF25, the suspension generated a geometric variation too aggressive under compression. This means that when the car passed through a bump or was compressed when braking, the alignment of the wheels changed more than expected. Leclerc, who has been in Ferrari for years, learned to compensate him with his style. Hamilton, who came from a Mercedes with linear and predictable behavior, was a car that was transformed under his feet. This not only made it slower, he made it vulnerable. He forced him to drive defensive. The Hungary GP then was not just a difficult race for Ferrari. It was the radiography of a technical and strategic failure. A point of no return where the team had to decide whether it persisted in a broken structure or if it dared to reinvent himself, in the middle of the season, to save a project that was born with promises of glory and was, just in August, in a critical condition. The discovery made after the Hungary Grand Prix not only triggered a technical shaking in Ferrari, it also caused a storm of internal consequences that are molding the future of the team and possibly the fate of its greatest signing in years, Lewis Hamilton. The first thing that was understood with painful clarity was that the SF25 had been built with a technical architecture that marginalized one of the two pilots. Not due to negligence but for lack of integrative vision. The base parameters of development, from the initial management feedback to the dynamic validation of the new suspension scheme, had been internally validated by references and styles that coincided, mainly with Leclerc and previously with Carlos Sainz. Within that framework, Hamilton's arrival represented a disruption that the car never correctly absorbed. Once Ferrari confronted this reality, the big question arose: how to act? Could they correct the course without compromising the whole season? The answer was complex. Because the limitations of SF25 are not easy to eliminate. They are embedded in their technical DNA. Changing the brake system requires redesigned materials, distributing new thermal loads, recalibrating sensors. Changing the address is not just installing a new zipper. It affects the behavior of the complete front axle. And modifying suspension geometry in full season is practically rebuilding the car from scratch. In the short term, Ferrari opted for palliative measures. They reassigned technical staff around Hamilton. They gave him greater maneuvering margin to try configurations that will approach his style. They introduced small variants in the motor maps and torque delivery to make the most predictable driving. But fundamentally, the car is still the same. And then the second consequence appeared: political wear. Within Maranello, a deft debate between two visions was lit. On the one hand, those who defend that the project must revolve around Leclerc, the house pilot, molded by the team with 5 years of internal experience and considered the future of Ferrari. On the other hand, those who see in Hamilton a unique opportunity, a strategic asset that can bring titles if the right environment is given. This fracture is not publicly visible, but internally it has become a friction point that already affects key decisions. The figure of Frédéric Vasseur is in the center of this tension. It was he who convinced Hamilton to join the project. And it is he who must now balance two worlds that collide: Leclerc's legacy and Hamilton's ambition. At the moment, its strategy has been diplomatic. He has publicly defended both pilots. But he knows that at some point he will have to take sides in development decisions. And here appears a third consequence, even more worrying: the reputational risk. Ferrari has presented himself as a team under reconstruction, with a vision of the future. But allowing one of the cars to work properly and the other does not transmit an image of improvisation, of lack of technical control. Worse, it shows that there was no cross-validation among pilots during the development of the SF25. A serious failure for a team of its size. From the sports point of view, the difference in results is evident. While Leclerc has added podiums and has been regularly in the fight for top 5, Hamilton has had to settle for marginal points or worse, with positions outside the top 10. That disparity already impacts the classification of builders, but above all affects the public narrative. Because Hamilton is not used to fighting for crumbs. And his post-Hungary statements have made it clear that his patience is not infinite. The problem is structural. But time is not. Ferrari cannot rebuild an entire car in the middle of the championship without sacrificing global performance. And Hamilton can't wait a whole season for the car to accommodate. So the conflict is temporary, technical, and existential. And then I release this reflection. Do you think Ferrari should redirect the development of the car thinking about Hamilton, although that implies partially sacrificing the performance of Leclerc? Or should everything bet on the pilot who has best understood the DNA of the SF25 and simply optimize his performance with him in front? Leave me your opinion in the comments. What side are you? Of the heptacampion that demands a machine that listens to it, or the heir of Maranello who has managed to adapt to the car as it is?